As things change, they remain the same. Nobody knew what those jobs were going to be as the mechanical marvels happened in the 1900s, and nobody knew what those jobs were going to be in the 80s that transitioned in the 90s, because they didn't exist. They didn't know what it would be. I can only hope that it will be a positive experience. I'm sure there'll be turmoil, but where we end up, I hope will be a much better place.
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the All Innovation, the AI podcast. We're incredibly excited because we're going to be talking about innovation with another amazing leader here today. We've got John, who's joining the show. In today's conversation, we're going to talk about his business growth. We're going to talk about innovation in leadership. We're going to talk about operational transformation and so much more. But as we kind of get things started here today, John, how's your heart doing today, brother?
My heart is doing well, thank you. This is exciting. I greatly appreciate you guys finding me and wanting for me to share the story. So I'm excited.
Well, Dante, let's get into it, bro.
Yeah, well, John, as we take the plane off here, innovation is such a big topic, but with the world today, everything seems like it's moving so fast. AI is rapidly evolving. People are really excited. There's other camps that are really fearful. With that in mind, what's one piece of wisdom that you want to impart? Like, what's one thing that you're hoping that the audience takes away from this conversation today?
I will pass on probably the most profound statement that was given to me in my mid-20s from a person that I had looked up to. And it was just very simply, as things change, they still remain the same. So as you look at all this type of growth and all this transformation, you'll find that the same threads still apply, and it's just a matter of navigating through those threads again.
I think this is an interesting little segue to talk about kind of the hysteria, right, that we've seen. And one of the benefits that I think I've been able to experience, and Dante, I'm sure, feels the same way. We're both 34 years old now today.
Mm-hmm.
Dante's actually 35, so he's ahead of me.
But
one thing that I know, right? Got to make sure we know. So we keep seeing like these patterns emerging in history, right? Where technology booms, right? People get super excited. Like Dante said, there's two camps. This is the best thing in the world. This is the end of the world. So when you say things change, but everything stays the same, what is kind of your intuition that we can pass on to the audience about this pocket or window of technology that we're in right now with AI and robotics and everything else that we're kind of seeing?
Things will shake out. Things will be different from as we know it. But it has happened here before, and it's happened twice. At least I see it twice in the past 100 years. One was the transformation of bigger machinery and more automation that happened in the early part of the century of the 1900s, and then in the 80s as the digital transformation began. In both instances, the scale of work and the type of work changed. In the 1900s, the story that I always gravitate towards is that it could take hundreds of men to pave 1 mile of road, and today it's done with 10 people and can be done in a day. And then the same thing in the 80s, where a average worker, the blue collar worker that we know and love, was middle class. However, fortunately or unfortunately, that changed with the digital transformation, and a lot of the work became more service oriented, and nobody knew what that was going to be. And as the 80s played out, things that were in marketing, things that were sales that didn't exist in the 70s became available and became visible to people in the 80s. And so it'll be there. It's just a question of looking for it. It's a question of drive. It's a question of striving to understand that you're going to be learning every year, every 10 years, a new type of skill set, and being ready for that.
I'd love to kind of double click on your journey to getting here. So, you started in mathematics, you got into computing. What was the journey like, your evolving journey through your career look like?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I started in mathematics in college and went over to the computer science. Really, really enjoyed that. But one of the things that I actually was missing was I enjoyed sort of being with people, leading with people. And so I drove myself to wanting to be in that intersection And once I found that intersection in the early mid 90s, then the trajectory just took off in my career, and became, moved up the path on the corporate ladder, moved up the path in the consulting ladder. And that was really what worked for me, was being able to lead and get people engaged in technology, and in essence helping the corporations do what they needed to do.
When you say, from a leadership perspective, right, leading an organization, one of the concepts that we talk about a lot on the podcast is like innovation in leadership, right? So we've seen a dramatic shift in how people lead organizations, get them behind a future-based cause. So what do you think is going on in the landscape of leadership right now? Because there are so many people who want to be followers, but it seems like we need more great leaders in organizations, especially in this critical time of how the technology is influencing organizations and the culture of teams that we build today.
Sure. Well, to the root of where we started, as things change, they stay the same. I remember the insight that was given of how many people are involved in leading your high school class, and it's basically less than 1%, and that isn't changing. So in essence, the 99% are followers in some way, shape, or form, and companies are driven in that, are made in that same mold. And the what is changing is that it is a little bit less coercive and a bit more intuitive in nature. My favorite person that I love in this is Bill Clinton. I was a kind of person that was driving, demanding. That's how I was raised. You scream. I was of that era to get those people going. That was what the 70s, 60s, 70s looked like. And I remember, learning about Bill Clinton and how he was able to motivate people, but he didn't actually really know and understand the topic. And as I dug in, I found out that his motivation technique was what's called the influencer or intuitive basis, and that personality type. And he was able to just connect people emotionally, get them to see the North Star, and get people pointing in that direction, and then let them do what they want to do. And as I understood that, my mode of leadership and management adjusted, and essentially began modeling after that type of idea and concept. And today I am very dead set on, we point to what the target is, we understand what the goals are, what the outcomes are, the expectations, and it is your job as the team to assemble how you want to do it. You use your style, you use your methodology, but you need to accomplish the goal.
I'd love to get like a little bit tactical here for a second. What are some tools or frameworks that you use to really motivate your team? So you said, you set an objective and you try to get everyone behind that goal, but there's a lot of leaders who listen to this podcast and say, yeah, that's great, but like, what does the day-to-day look like to get the team behind a mission, a vision? So I'm kind of curious your 2 cents on that.
It is about understanding. So it is actually about building the team that becomes critical at that point. So one of the things that I have been lucky in, or fortunate in, is being able to find people who want to do things, who are interested in the direction, and that in and of itself leads to minimal disruption. And then the other piece is to understand as a framework how they fit into the puzzle of that, called the organization, or puzzle of the team. And as a result, they begin to gain ownership of their perspective and what they are as an element in that engine. And so they know that what they do is critical to the success of the team, the product, what they're building, and they understand what it is that they're providing. And that seems to just get everything oiled and the flywheel going, and do it in a smooth way.
This is an interesting concept for me, Dante, because we always listen. We've had a couple people on the podcast, and one of the phrases that's been shared recently is culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? And whenever you listen to incredibly strong and successful CEOs and leaders of organizations, right, they always say it's more so about how you build the team. The people are the foundation, and even the products that we create. But that's like a higher form of leverage that so many younger entrepreneurs and younger leaders struggle with, because they think it's all skills based, and it's always a what problem. It's a marketing problem. It's a product problem, rather than it's a who problem. Being able to bring that right team member on, get them behind that future based cause to be able to build an amazing product. And I love just hearing leaders like you kind of re-emphasize that. Why do you think so many people struggle with, recognizing it's a people game, not even the product or the service game?
I don't know. It's a great point you're making. It can be simply age versus wisdom. It can be personality and challenges one had as a child versus the other child, right? There are generational shifts, and in those shifts we see different archetypes. This is kind of a different topic. This is really kind of hitting a concept that's near to me, which is the fourth turning. And in that, specifically, each of the generations have a mentality of either we're beliefs in the group or beliefs in the self. And that will guide kind of what we'll see. Part of that transition to being more influencer is the generational shift.
I mean, Dante, we see this all the time, right? So one thing about me, John, is I hosted a podcast for a while called the HR Heroes Podcast, and I did like 170 plus episodes talking to leaders of HR from some of the largest organizations across the world. And we always got onto the concept of like the generational shift in work. And I was actually saw a clip on social media the other day where there's a captain in the Navy, right? And he's talking to a potential Marine who's going through SEAL school. And they're like, so what's going on with the new generation of Gen Z in the military? And he said, these are some of the most, I would say, confident individuals in themselves. They have the ability to push against authority, and they're more grounded in who they are more so than ever. So he talks about a story. He's like, we were doing a training exercise. This Marine or potential Marine makes a mistake. So he's sitting in front of the officers board, and his commanding officer's laying into him, yelling about what the mistake he made. And like, so why shouldn't we just, kick you out of the school? And he was like, well, I don't believe, honestly, that I made a mistake. I made the best decision that I could have in that moment. Normally, somebody from a previous generation would have folded. And so it comes to the point where, the captain of the Navy is talking to him. He's like, I have the authority to let you go right now and end your career, or I can push you through this. Are you scared, or are you scared of me? And he said, sir, I'm not scared of you, but I do respect you. And it seems like there's just a different way in which we meet people, right, from an authoritative perspective in this new generation that really kind of helps us inform kind of what that fourth turning is. I saw Dante kind of light up there, so I know that maybe you want to build on that, Dante. I'm not so familiar with the fourth turning, so can you guys kind of inform me and the audience a little bit about that, John and Dante?
I'll let Dante.
Go ahead.
See, no, I want to hear Dante, because he did light up when you said that. So
I'm gonna butcher it. It was so long ago, but I did hear a couple people speak about the book. And so the idea is that there's 4 different archetypes or generations, and each time we transition into a new generation, there's basically an expectation of how the generation is going to perform, and they measure it over the course of 100 years. And at the end of 100 years, there's supposed to be like a giant reset, like a war or something like that happens that resets the sequence. And so that's kind of the big idea. Maybe John, you can give some more context.
Sure. So a little more context is, so think of 4 generations and 100 years, ostensibly about 25 years per generation. And it essentially is the idea of, one is the self, one is the family. So the kids coming out, so you guys are a little younger, but to our parents who would let us alone, they can't comprehend the idea, they'll let us alone and kick us out of the house. So that generation, and they can't comprehend the idea of our children living with us as young adults. They can't comprehend the idea of kind of snuggling in bed at 6, 7, 8, 9 years of age, because our generation, our parents' generation to us was you sleep on your own within 6 weeks, 6 months, whatnot, right? And so there, it's literally that diverse in the way that it's thought. And so each of those generations changes. So there is the self, there is the group, there is the belief in the government, shall we say, or in the organizational structure, and then there's the one that tears it down. And we're in the tear down phase. And I was of the mindset that this is a bad thing. But then a comment was made by, I can't remember his name, the author, and he said, well, the wealth is in, so at that fourth turning, the wealth is in the few. The byproduct of the teardown is the redistribution of wealth. So it is, in essence, the rebalancing of the environment. And then we can also look back in history, and this is part of that thread that I started, that came out in the beginning, is they were able to document it to the 1300s. We know these as the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, and World War II. These were the moments where the teardowns happened.
How do you think about our current state, right? When we think about like all innovation, right? One of the common topics we talk about is like AI as an example, which is kind of like an exponential. Dante has a great saying here on the podcast. If you take 30 linear steps, you're at 30. You take 30 exponential steps, you're at 1 billion. Right.
Yes.
So now we have infrastructure around us, even with remote working, high-speed internet, a technology window of like high compute, AI, robotics, things like that is a way to redistribute wealth, as an example, for this new generation that we couldn't even quantify from somebody like my parents' generation who was born in like the early 60s. Right. Thinking about this, I would say, lever that you can pull on that helps you create like revenue out of thin air through the internet and other systems is kind of crazy. And so this is kind of a really big teardown. How do you think things are going to reshuffle?
So I would think of it a little differently. You're touching on really what we did earlier, which was the transformation of how roads were built and how digital influenced. The AI is now transitioning. So the idea is that whatever this cost is to do a podcast is nominal, is nothing compared to what it was 50 years ago. And, from an equipment, I'm talking from an equipment perspective, if you could afford the equipment, how many people were involved, right? And so the second half of that is the type of work that comes out. So we see, and we may or may not, we may miss it, we may not miss it. So the Kardashians, as an example, are a self-brand, the Mr. Beast. I sort of picked a couple of names for that purpose. And this is coming out to be a new type of work, right? Is to be able to, like you're saying, it's out of thin air. It's just a different way of leveraging the infrastructure that is available to us, the technology, to generate revenue in a way that had not been thought of before. The same idea. Actually, another example that through research we dug up was you can think of the sports athletes. They didn't exist in the 1800s. And so what happened was in the late 1800s, the circuses came about, and they were able to succeed because there was free time for the population. So they were able to have a little extra money, they were able to go spend it, and that was the seeds to the very innovation of entertainment in the way that we see it today. And if you were to talk to generations of who lived in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, who were raised at that time, they see it as, oh, it's just sort of a diversion, and that person has to go get a second job. But now they're the top athletes are making generational wealth, are earning generational wealth. So that is the same idea as the new generation now doing podcasts, doing influencing, and becoming multimillionaires out of it.
One of
Crazy
the
time to be
things,
alive.
yeah, I know,
What happened?
right? He said,
I
"Great
said
time to
crazy
be
time.
alive."
Yeah, exactly.
It is absolutely what is coming, and for what it's worth, the generation that's coming, hooking the fourth turning in, it will be the equivalent of the transcendental period of the early 1800s, where there was a lot of self-evolving and a lot of good times. And that's, I'm excited about that, to see that, especially for my children, and the generation that's coming forward.
Yeah, these exponential technologies have so much power, and it's really hard to pinpoint where we're going to be in 5, 10, 25 years out. It just seems like absurd to try to predict like
Yeah,
what it's going to look
no
like.
idea.
Yeah. One of the questions I have is in this kind of transition period, like how do we realign incentives? Okay, so the idea is that things are changing,
You
and
mean
right
for the
now,
worker? Sorry,
for the
you mean
worker, yeah,
okay.
for the workers, yeah. So here's an example. We had a podcast 2 weeks ago with a gentleman of a large web development agency. He says, "Hey, I have a copywriter who, once upon a time, several years ago, pre 2022, before ChatGPT, the expectation on her was, I need you to create 10 pieces of really great content per month."
Hmm.
Post ChatGPT, it seems absurd because now it's really easy to create a piece of content for a position like that. So the
Hmm.
expectation 20x. He's like, "Hey, I need 200 pieces of content from you per month because now you can do so much more with these tools and technologies." But there are challenges with this new way because there are roles that maybe us as leadership don't really recognize that now these things can be done with with AI. And so you might have an employee who works 40 hours per week, but really now it takes them 5, 6 hours per week to do their job where it used to take
Hmm.
them 40.
Hmm.
But you could be blind to that as a leader. How do we reorganize incentive structures to where employees want to share some of these learnings with the company so that way everyone is moving in tandem rather than guarding that information to itself? If I was an employee, maybe I would want to share that. The expectation is 40 hours per week. I get to work 6 and I have all this free time or leisure time. What do you think about that idea?
I have a really practical example of this as well, right, John? So I know somebody who
Yes.
is in the financial space. They're an accountant, right?
Yes.
They use AI now to be able to get through their workload within an hour of the day. And so something that came out during the pandemic was a mouse jiggler, right? They put their mouse on this pad and it moves around on their screen, so their screen is consistently active. They now don't work nearly as much as they once did, but their bosses, right, or their managers don't know that. And so how do we realign, like Dante said, those incentive structures to keep people motivated?
It is. I suspect this is so. One is there will always be. We have to understand that there is a spectrum in personalities, and there will always be anecdotal evidence to whatever side that one wants. The challenge is, uh, there is a lot of mistrust, or is it distrust, in organizations today, because uh, it is pushing down, the company is pushing down on the individuals and squeezing them, and it is not a balance. So uh, from our company's perspective, our goal is actually to build trust from the top to down, so that they do feel safe to make these, uh, um, to feel good about expressing this information. Number one, and then number two, it is uh, incumbent upon us as leaders to be seeing these transformations coming, because the there is the sort of the famous anecdote, you can be the best buggy whip maker in the country and you still will be out of a job, right?
Mm-hmm.
And buggy whips were the predecessor for, to use on horses, in case you don't know, in the 1900s, just as the car was coming out. So you, as the skill set died out, you could still be the best, but you didn't have any, nobody was buying it, so it didn't matter. And so that's why I'm saying we as leaders have to be careful to ensure that we are not becoming outmoded, our company's not becoming outmoded as well.
I mean, there's appropriate ways to kind of talk about this digital transformation. I want to get your opinion. So recently, within the week of us recording this podcast, I'm going to pull up something for us to check it out. The Shopify CEO made a really bold claim by basically mandating that all of his employees start utilizing AI even before. So this is on the screen for everybody who's not on YouTube. Shopify CEOs that staffers need to prove their jobs can't be done by AI before asking for more headcount. And so he literally mandated that the organization starts embracing AI and how they're going to utilize these tools before they can even expect to ask for their teams to be grown. And so is that the appropriate way to kind of like force everybody in the direction of using AI? Because it's inevitable, but what's the appropriate way for leaders can navigate this kind of transition that we're going through?
So I would take a contextual perspective on that, actually, because I've been through that conversation 25 years ago. The issue it's not the issue, the construct or the frame is actually the executive team, the executive management. And the challenge is that the executive management you're pulling something really old here. So there is either I believe in people, I believe in technology, I believe, and it's kind of that mix, right? And so either they're saying we're heading in technology, and where there's an opportunity, we want to do technology first, and when there's not, we'll do people. Versus a company who says we will invest in our people and technology second. And so the way he may be saying it may be harsh. That's one issue. But the fact that he's describing what is kind of been out there for, I mean, for me, it's 20 years, but I think it's been going on longer. The value proposition is that what we are observing is a company whose leadership has basically said we are technology first, people second, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just it's just being made visible to a more larger audience than just simply the company.
I guess part two of that, Dante, I want to kind of transition into, a huge term that we talk to a lot of leaders about, which is like agentic AI, right? So we hear a lot about AI agents. And one of the concepts I like to share is like, we have to get people to quantify and understand what the future of hybrid work looks like. Now, hybrid coming from the pandemic was working at home or working remotely, if you will, and in the office. A mixture of both was hybrid. But now with the state of artificial intelligence, AI agents, if you will, there's going to be a future hybrid workforce where we have digital team members, right? These AI agents that work on behalf of and in tandem with their human team members. So how do you think about this new landscape of like human and digital team members working together? And then how does a leader kind of justify saying, hey, listen, if we can bring in a whole bunch of agents who can work on behalf of our organization, call centers, things like that, with the current people first mentality that people are looking for as well.
We've done it. This was part of the irony is, yes, we've actually done this. This is what our marketing infrastructure is. We have embraced the AI. And so our marketing infrastructure, though we still have the same number of people, we're relatively small. The conversation was had at the executive level. This is clearly it can reduce the team by 80%.
Yeah.
And can do the very topics that you were describing. I'm sorry, the very points that you were bringing up earlier, which is I copyright 10 in a month. I can now do it all in 30 minutes or in one day. And even worse is I don't even have to have competency in the topic that's being written.
Right.
Yeah. So we've actually embraced that. There is a sense that we're going to be reducing staff at some point because as the team gets more efficient with the tool, as the tool gets a little more mature, it can be done by 20 to 25% of the team size. Um, yes, it's coming. Yeah. So sorry,
I had this
yes.
I had this conversation with Keenan in 2022. I was like, hey, like as a marketer, I was like, Keenan, as soon as ChatGPT dropped, I was like, the size of marketing teams are going to collapse seemingly
Yes.
overnight. And, you know, here we are in 2025, and that is, you know, coming true. And, you know, it's really, really easy to see the writing on the wall for some positions where the technology is today. But as we said earlier, this is a quantum technology, like it's moving so quickly. And so we're looking at, you know, other ways that it could be affected. So with that in mind, John, I would love for you to kind of share maybe some other use cases that really get you excited about this exponential technology.
So my sense is we're going to see it is very likely happening. It's just a question of whether it's visible. Is in areas that are more manual in nature, or where it is less tech in nature, and that there is a reliance on I don't want to say critical thinking, but a decision making, an observance and a decision making. So is this an apple? Is this a purse? Is this a, is the plant growing the way it's supposed to be? And what AI will provide is the ability for those decisions to be made. Maybe a little more easily. The farmer doesn't have to go out and look at the crops. They can run a drone and it'll just take care of it. One that we heard was, so to me, being from the Bay Area, I can run a drone across the bridge and with a scanner be able to, from an AI perspective, take images and then come back and say, here's where the fracture points are. Here's where the rust is that needs to be dealt with, versus having people having to go around and do those checks. So that is, my sense is that is one of the biggest areas that we'll see get hit in the next 10 years. We're probably just kind of touching, it's just being worked into the economy, the industries themselves right now, but then they'll start jumping out and become more visible in the near future. So
I'm really interested on how quickly industries have come up, right? A good example is Uber, right? When me and Dante were in our young 20s, right, there was no Uber, and then Uber started exploding, and now Uber's become a part of everyday life, right? We've also seen in the Bay Area companies like Waymo, right, that have autonomous vehicles that will drive around, all sensor-based, LiDAR-based systems, and you see them interacting in society. One of the things that's coming up here in June that was announced by Tesla is they're actually going to have their autonomous taxi fleet going live in Austin, Texas, where your car literally will be able to leave your driveway, go pick somebody up, drop it off. I'm not sure what the metrics of the business model look like behind it, but AI is going to be able to facilitate all of these different types of use cases. Is it a threat to Uber and the humanistic interaction and the friction point of having a driver that needs to take you places? I don't know. What's kind of your opinion on how an industry like Uber can explode and then be automatically threatened within a decade by how now AI can kind of automate that process, especially through like an infrastructure company like Tesla?
Great question. I would bring a little context to it and frame it. In the turn of the century, in the 1920s, there were some 30 plus car companies, and many of the early ones who spiked disappeared. And we are experiencing that type of transformation in technology. We can say technology, we can say, however you want to frame that. And so there are many companies that will explode up and then dive down because the second instance of that ideology is now being leveraged in a more advanced way, a more complex or comprehensive way, and can take over. So Uber, and I'm not knocking it, and I'm not a specialist on it, but Uber is just simply there to us, as we did research back in the day. Uber solved two problems. One was the movement of money with much less friction, which was really exciting. And then they created maps of moving cars. Basically, it's the pick up, drop off, delivery capability. So on scale, they really put on a delivery capability. The Waymo and the Tesla and that conversation is really about the transformation of the utility value of the vehicle, right? In San Francisco, we've had conversations with people who are driving this. Sorry for the double pun. And really what they're getting at is the value of that car is going to drop to just outright commodity. And the second part of that is we're going to see the utility. How often do you drive your car? That's its utility in a given day. And so regardless of how we think of it, very few people really drive in any extensive amount of time. Mm-hmm. They may drive 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the evening extensively, like on a commute, or a couple shots here and there. Otherwise, it's sitting idle. The idea that's coming forth, and really what you're expressing, is that car has now become a commodity, and I can I can rent it, I can resell it for use to other people. So one of the ideas was in San Francisco, people would drive their cars in from East Bay into San Francisco, and then somebody else can pick it up and act like an Uber with that car, earn money on it while it's sitting idle, and then return it so that the person can go home. So it's this layering effect that's coming as well. So just by shifting a little bit the paradigm, one begins to see that what we know will fall, and then new versions of that will come forward. And it's not clear that may be the last, right? There may be one more iteration that comes. And you can think of, I can't remember. So before Facebook, there was
MySpace.
Sorry?
MySpace.
And it took off and it cratered, right? And so it's happened even recently. So in the tech industry, many of these took off, but they required an adjustment to them to really last longer. And that's really what we're seeing. That's really what we'll see. And from an Uber perspective, yes, they are challenged because of the people issue. So they will transform to a non-people issue, I'm sure.
So you believe they'll transition to maybe mostly an AI fleet, mm-hmm. where AI is driving? Yeah, that makes sense.
Oh yeah, because really the piece that Uber's going to have to kind of figure out is the vehicle, where to get the vehicle, right? Tesla has kind of got it because they've got a fleet out there of customer-owned fleet. So they're just going to rent it against those, as you're describing, right?
And I wonder how much, this is going to sound like, I don't want to sound like a terrible human being here, but when you hear about, a lot of the negative experiences that come from Uber, right? You mm-hmm. think that it is the human variable that's inside the loop, right? You had a creepy driver. People didn't feel safe with this individual. This individual crashed the car while you were in the car. And it's like even removing, right, the human element out of that delivery loop creates more sustainability, a better experience, but also is mm-hmm. safer as well. Just because Dante and I both drive Teslas, and I use full self-driving, the FSD, all the time. And that technology is phenomenal. And so it helps you kind of recalibrate what the driving experience looks like, but also how safe it is. Makes you think about how bad everybody is as a driver when they're human, two-handing 10 and 2, kind of the wheel and everything like that, which is an interesting concept as well.
Yeah, the only comment I can provide as a consumer, seeing the 60 Minutes type documentaries that come out, and sort of trying to digest the statement, the biggest problem in the car driving experience is the driver. Mm-hmm. So, and you have to reflect and go, okay, there's a little humility there. Yes, we are probably the source of the problems, less the cars, which they don't. So you can think of it this way: if 1% of the cars broke, all hell would be breaking loose, right?
Yeah.
There'd be recalls everywhere if 1% of the cars were actually having problems.
I'd love to kind of shift because that brought up an interesting point. Everyone's talking about automation, everyone's talking about AI, and the net effect of it, everyone's thinking, hey, jobs are going to be displaced, right? So roles that we had yesterday are not going to be there today. McKinsey had a study, and they said by the year 2030, roughly 500 million jobs are going to be displaced or replaced by automation and AI. But on the flip side, they believed an additional 80 million jobs would be created because of the new needs within the workforce. Like 580 million jobs are going to be created. I'm curious your take on this idea of needing to retool our workforce as we go through this massive transformation so quickly. 2030 is right around the corner, and we're talking about hundreds of millions of jobs that are going to be displaced and need to be, and our workforce is going to need to be upskilled and reskilled.
Yes, yes. So we are entering a life where it'll be lifelong learning. You'll have to be transitioning into different skill sets that we are not even aware what those will need to be today. Things that are probably the area. It's a little generic in statements, but the idea of people who are more critical thinking or evolve to that critical thinking and then just adapt to whatever the industry and the work is. People who are creative in nature or strive to be more creative, and then being adaptable to what's in front of us will be the ones who come out of it. The 2030 feels a little fast because that's really, typically the life-changing technologies, there was usually one or two that happened, and it took a generation for a generation to adapt how to deal with it. Something like what's being described by McKinsey becomes a bit more impactful and disruptive simply because if 500 million people don't have jobs, it will, and 80. So what maybe I misinterpreted what was said, but only 80 million new jobs will be there from the 500 lost.
500 million lost, but 580 million created. New jobs created. Yeah.
And I guess this comes back to the same thing that we talked about. As things change, they remain the same. Nobody knew what those jobs were going to be as the mechanical marvels happened in the 1900s, and nobody knew what those jobs were going to be in the 80s that transitioned in the 90s because they didn't exist. They didn't know what it would be. So, yeah, I can only hope that it will be a positive experience. I'm sure there'll be turmoil, but where we end up, I hope will be a much better place.
With your experience and being able to kind of see patterns, like I talked about a little earlier, John, here's kind of like a philosophical question, right? What is the media today ignoring that in the future scientists will study when it comes through the lens of technology and how it's kind of impacting our lives today? What do you think about that?
What is the media ignoring that scientists... that's a good question. I think the one of the things I've kind of come to learn is because I've had a number of friends describe to me the frustration with scientists, and the scientists are able to articulate of what's going on at the best understanding that we have at the time. And the challenge to that statement is, as more knowledge is gained, we know the term, as you gain more knowledge, you make a better decision. As more knowledge is gained, scientists are able to rewrite that landscape. And that is probably the most valuable thing. So science is going to figure out different ways of doing things or different understandings of the environment of our technology. And that will be different than what we understand it today. And that's what's probably the most important thing.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes, and I'm paraphrasing, is all human sciences are but passing fables as we learn what lies beyond them.
That's fantastic. I have never heard
Yeah.
that. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. In the vein of media, John, I'd love for you to talk about your view on media in business. There's so many different evolving trends. One is, leader-led marketing, founder-led marketing, where the leader comes on to podcasts or different vehicles. LinkedIn's a popular channel as well, and is able to articulate some of the missions and visions of the company. I'm curious your 2 cents on the role of that type of media in today's modern age.
It is. I think it's just a medium that is allowing that messaging. It's just becoming more visible. Just as you think of social media, it isn't that people weren't doing the activities prior to social media. It's just that social media has made it more visible to the masses. And so what we're seeing is the leaders just using these as places for which to brand and market. And that's kind of my perception of what that is. The real meat of it is when they're interacting, do we really see what they are when they're interacting under challenge, under pressure with the company, with the people, with their internal leaders, and how are they really doing that? It is very likely that there is a polished message. Sorry, I'm being a little cynical here, but there is very likely a more polished message that's being expressed publicly versus who are they internally, and how how do they represent themselves to the people, to the teams, to the organization. And what is truly visible is the successes. When you see the successes of those individuals in those organizations, they're clearly doing something well. And one can think of it as like, I talked to my sons about it, like, what was the magic? What was the uniqueness that happened for the football team to go and win the Super Bowl? Because virtually every team has some good strengths to it, but there's something unique, and it has to come from the top all the way down. There's some kind of buy-in. There's some kind of synergy. There's a tie-in to a lot of the topics we said. Everybody understands where they fit into that team, what their value is, what the role is that they bring, and how they make a difference, and why they will go an extra mile to be successful. And it doesn't mean that somebody has to be screaming necessarily. It has to be about getting that motivation to occur.
So, John, we have a tradition here on the podcast where our
Sure.
previous guest wants to ask you a blind question. Okay. So this is going to be interesting. And I want to give a little bit of context to this. In a conversation yesterday I was having, I heard this quote again that kind of inspired me to bring it into today. Calm seas never made a skilled sailor. Mm-hmm. Right now, there's a lot of turbulence in the marketplace of business, mm-hmm. right? And so what are the key skill sets that a leader who is going through a tough time or a time of challenge in their organization can leverage to help their organization move forward into a more prosperous time from your perspective?
Experience in troubled waters, literally. Mm-hmm. It is, it's an interesting statement. So I grew up in the consulting in my career, and I remember this very vividly. I was early 30s, and I was at a bank, and the data center blew. Literally, fire alarms go off. We're in San Francisco, big tower, and oh my God. And I had been through multiple challenges like this because I'd been consulting prior, and I was now an employee, vice president, moving up in the IT department. And the CIO comes out and he's kind of panicked. And actually, I was sort of the lower man on the totem pole, and there were 4 or 5 others who were more senior than me, and they're all kind of shaking. And I'm like, okay, you go do this, you go do that. We've got a call tree that we've got to follow. You go make sure there's people out below, on the floors below. You go make sure. And all of a sudden, everybody, aligns in and goes and does their job, and they start reporting back to me. And at that moment, I realized that it is because of those experiences historically that brought the calm to that moment, so that you knew that you could navigate the waters. And so I would pose that it is not that moment. It is not at the moment you get to figure it out. It is that you have been figuring it out for a long time.
Well, John, we can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast, man. Seriously,
Sure.
Being able to
I
talk
hope
through
I
these
did okay.
concepts. You killed it, man. That was great. That was amazing. I'm sure everybody who tuned in, watched, and listened today absolutely enjoyed the conversation. So, guys, we'll catch you in the next one. That's the pod.